Hey, thanks for being with us. I'm Tony Hammack, pastor of Jubilee Family Church, here with Dr. Mark Carbaugh. He's a minister of the gospel up in Cape Girardeau, Missouri area. Pastors a church there called the Rock of Cape, and is also superintendent of a school called Eccl Ridge Christian School. At least that's the last I've heard. You may have more hats. You may have more responsibilities now. But it's great to be with you, Dr. Carbaugh, and I want to let our listeners know, our viewers know that you're a very special person to me, and that over the years, you kind of took a chance on me back in 1997. You thought, hey, this guy might be a good youth pastor. And I remember thinking, no, I don't think so. I don't think I'm I'm not very youthy. But you and Pastor Debbie and the church took a chance with me and Andrea, and you let us come on staff at your church, and we were there together for nine or so years, and Andrea longer than that. And I just really appreciate you and love you, and I'm so thankful for the door you opened for me, and it's really helped me. I couldn't have done anything without that door being there, and without you trusting me and making a way for me. So I honor you for that, and I always think about you, and I'm not going to start crying though, but but I do appreciate you very much, and I think about you often. And when I was around you for a while, and I remember when I first got around you, I didn't really understand you very well, and I tried to. I really wanted to understand you, but you were a very unique person, in my mind at the time, especially back in '97, and I remember trying to kind of figure out how you thought, and I struggled with that. And then I don't know when it happened, but it just clicked. And I got to a place where I knew what you were thinking, and I could kind of predict where you were going with things. And what that did for me is it kind of gave me your perspective, and it fathered me in a lot of ways. It prepared me for it added a lot of dimensionality to my character, and that's another thing I'm really in your debt for. And but anyway, I know, like, when you begin to share things, you've got some, in my mind anyway, you've got some really powerful strengths. You've got some areas that I've never seen anyone operate in the way you do. And one of the things that really stands out to me is what I always kind of call, and there's somebody out there that'll say, oh, that's not the right thing to call it, but it's prophetic wisdom. And to me, what that means is the ability to kind of recognize, the Bible says we know in part, we prophesy in part. So we see through a smoked mirror or clouded glass, depending on which translation you read. So we're all trying to walk in the Spirit. We're all trying to recognize what the Spirit of God is saying. And at the same time, you've got a very a well-developed mind. Your mind, you're not just like some goofy guy that has, visions, but you hear the Lord, and with that, there's always this eye on the circumstances of life, society, what's going on in the world, paying attention to the news, trying to get dialed in on the powers that be, the deep state, whatever you want to call that. And so all that kind of works together in your mind. And so then you kind of come out with these ideas, that are sometimes, for some people, they may be difficult ideas, that it may create like challenges for people because they haven't done the diligence. They haven't spent the time that you've spent in prayer, the time that you've spent in, studying and preparing and thinking about all these things. So I said all that to say, we're obviously in a very interesting time right now in U.S. history, with the COVID-19 thing happening, and now with I don't know if I should call them race riots, or, if that's the right thing, rioting that's going on in various cities around the country. It's very interesting to me that this is all unfolding, and I know you have a lot of thoughts about it. And I want to say one more thing, and then I'm going to kick it over to you. But I had a dream not too long ago where I saw a bumblebee dancing on a hive. And I'd seen some documentary years ago where bees would dance, in a little pattern on the hive. And somehow that would communicate to the other bees that, hey, there's nectar over there, or there's food over there. And so the other bees would interpret that dance and know where to find food. So in this dream, you were in it. And so I looked up from the B, and you were standing there looking at me. And I looked at you and I said, does this mean we're going to see civil unrest? And you said, yes. So then the dream ended and I woke up. Well, it was pretty early. It was early in the morning. And so I sent you a text on a timer because I didn't know if you were awake or not. I didn't want to send you a text at 4 a.m. or whatever time it was, but I didn't want to forget either. So I crafted this text and I basically said to you, now the dream's over. This isn't real life. I said, do you think we're going to see civil unrest? And you wrote me back with a one-word answer, just like in the dream. And you said, yes. I was like, oh man, it's just like the dream, So in the dream, I thought the civil unrest would be very related to food shortages or infrastructure breakdowns and supply chain disruptions from the COVID-19 and trade disruptions and all those kinds of things. I really personally didn't see this police brutality and racial tension being the issue at the time, but here we are, So I just kind of want to turn it over to you and maybe tell us, what you saw coming, why you thought that, and then we'll kind of take what we think we know about right now in history. And let's try to kind of formulate some future, let's try to just kind of talk about what we think might happen in the future.
Okay. Well, it's good to be with you. And
thank you.
Just to relate back to a little bit what you said a little bit earlier about trying to figure me out, my son-in-law, who you helped mentor, and my son had an extensive conversation yesterday about that very topic, trying to figure me out.
Yeah.
And so they drew some conclusions, and I think Andrew might have said that it's kind of like a bell went off in his mind for the first time. He began understanding a little bit about me, and I've been around him for a good while. He's the father of my grandkids, and so we've had a long tenure, you and I, and we've gone through a number of things. And through that, the biggest thing probably is how it has developed our personalities and our character. I and you both have grown through our relationship, and it's one thing that is needed today is that kind of relationship that helps mold and shape, how we are and what we do and the way we make decisions. And taking from an older generation, you always gain the years of wisdom and insight that they've gotten through experience, which the younger generation has not had the experience of. And so I have valued that in my life, and I know that you value that in your life. And it's just good to listen to the older generation as to what they say. And so I really pay attention to somebody that's much older than I and have a few things to share. I always listen to it. But getting to your question about, what I may see, and I'm not putting myself up as a prophet and speaking things, in that category. I kind of balance things from a very natural process. Paul said first naturals, then spirituals. That there is a balance that we go through, and we need to take time to consider everything, the steps that we've taken and the steps that we're getting ready to take. And so I pour a lot of time into understanding traits, the way people make decisions and how things unfold so that I can better determine what the next day or the next week may look like. And looking at, given what we have now, which is there's a lot of stuff going on right now. We went through the impeachment scenario, and which got nowhere as far as what some had desired to see. And then it seems like almost immediately thereafter, we move into this pandemic, COVID-19. And then just as soon as that thing begins to wane, we begin to see now these riots that are unfolding in 30 plus cities across America. And, you begin to think twice about these events and the reasons for them, why they are happening. Now, yes, there was a travesty done to George Floyd, and that was very difficult to watch. But that the riots that are going on now are not basically reflecting that aspect of it. It's morphed into something more, which there's a number of indications now that there seems to be planning behind all that. And I began to, pull all these things together, and I question everything.
Sure.
And so when I began to, way back, even with you, even years ago, even probably 8, 9 years ago, I began to just formulate a process of what I saw unfolding with the economy and how all that was going to happen, not knowing the intricate details, but knowing that we can't go on this same road we're going on as a country, incurring the enormous debt. And then we find out now, coming through all this, and then with the PPP and the stimulus package that was presented at a tune of $3 trillion, that gets added on to where we are now. You're at 23, $24 trillion, and they're talking about another 3 trillion somewhere down the road, though the Republicans have kind of pushed it off a little bit. I do think that the initiative behind the scenes is ultimate universal income, which I believe has flavors of socialism connected with it. So I began to look at all this and say, is there a factor that we're not seeing? Is this just mere racism that's going on, or is there more things to it than that? And I believe there's more things going on than just that. We've got world situations going on. We've got the China issue, which is probably the biggest one that I'm looking at, and their incursion into neighboring countries. And what they want to do is world domination, and how they would plan, and listening to what some of their past generals have said, the process of assimilating the United States. They have a plan, and they're working that plan. So when I piece that together, I piece the Wuhan virus, COVID-19 scenario together. I piece the economic situation together. It seems to be that we're moving towards much quicker a place where this country is going to experience a lot of calamity, chaos, rioting, because I've been calling for that for a good while. That we would see riots in this country. I initially began seeing it in the big cities, and I just began to speak and say, well, it looks like there's going to be rioting that will take place in the bigger cities, and there will be some level of, then I was terming it as kind of like limited martial law to bring things under control. And now that's been put on the table and presented even, on national media.
Right.
I suspect that we will move in that direction. It may be limited in scope, maybe just around the big cities. Not sure how that will unfold, but we are plunging in a time, especially from now until the election time. And then I've got to say, I question whether we're going to have an election or not. That's a real big issue because given when I look at the patterns of what they're doing now with Biden staying in the basement, I guess he's come out twice as of today to give some speech. And then Trump, their platforms of running for office is kind of put to the side, basically, and they're dealing with what's at hand. So there's not a lot that's going on in the media presentation of that. So when I look at that, I think, okay, are we still moving towards an absolute election, in November or not? So I mean, there's a good chance we may not have an election. But I suspect that what we're seeing now going on will continue at some form. They may get control of the cities and bring these things to an end, but that's not going to stop, because I think there's a lot of other components that have been placed into our country that, when activated, it will ratchet up what we're seeing as far as chaos and, put another word to it, terrorism, occurring in this country. So I'm seeing these things coming very quickly. We're going to see a lot happen between now and the time of the election. And there's going to be elements of terrorism, I believe, is going to start creeping on the scene. I think it begins as we've seen with the riots and the looting going on, and then you're going to see the shooting, which we've already begun seeing that. In fact, in St. Louis, 2 hours away from me, they had shootings last night of police officers. So the shooting's going to pick up, and the military will be involved. Obviously, the National Guard's been brought in. So we'll see all this as how this unfolds in the days and weeks ahead. But I think that ultimately we will see civil war to some level, limited maybe in scope in this country. And that's not because of anybody wanting that to happen. I think that that's what will happen because of what's been seeded and what's been happening with groups of people in this country, and some that have been imported into this country. So I'm kind of in my mind preparing for the understanding that things may be shut down, not because of now a pandemic, which many people are used to, but we may actually see parts of our country shut down because of fighting going on until that's brought under control. My concerns with that is, what does that do to our country, and what does it do as far as the rest of the world sees that, and does that make us or put us in a weakened state? And it quite possibly could, and I've always believed that at some point, and this is a hard one to swallow, that there are other countries that desire to invade this country and to take this country away for their own use. And I think that's some of what maybe we're moving towards, and we got to be very concerned. And you say, why do I say that? I think there's enough information by the generals of past, the countries of the past that have spoken of this. And I think that looking at the southern border with the motion cams, taking pictures and videos of military personnel crossing our southern border into this country and fanning out is of great concern to me. And it should be for anybody if that's going on. And I understand the reasoning, at least in part, of why the president wants to shut the southern border down. And I'm all for that because we got to get a handle on all this. But let me shuffle it back over to you and answer any questions you got.
Well, I'm hearing you talk, and I began to reflect on Dimitri Duduman. I don't know if you're familiar with Dimitri Duduman or not.
Yeah.
But he was on John Kilpatrick's, interviewed him down in Brownsville, Florida, I think, which was the place where the Brownsville revival happened. And I think he had him in before the revival. I might be wrong about that. I've seen the video. It looks like VHS quality video on YouTube. And you're basically saying, in a lot of ways, what Dimitri talked about, that he had a visitation from an angel. I think Dimitri was a Romanian minister. He was a missionary and Bible smuggler kind of guy, got in some trouble, got in jail for the work of the gospel. And he ended up having an angelic visitation, and the angel took him all over the United States. And he, if I remember it right, he saw nuclear devices detonated on U.S. soil. And those were in, I remember Florida, I think he said was completely wiped out. I think he said that Las Vegas was completely wiped out. I think a lot of the eastern seaboard, western seaboard were wiped out. And that there would be a civil war in the United States, which would predicate a foreign invasion. And so, as you're talking, I can't help but think about what he was saying. And, that the idea I like to discuss often is what I call cognitive dissonance. You hear an idea and you just go, no way, that's crazy, But, you hear that idea once and you kind of go, that's crazy. You hear it again, you go, yeah, that's crazy. You hear it again, you put it on the back burner. You hear it again, you kind of move it to the middle burner. And then after a while, you think, well, man, maybe I need to start thinking about this. I need to start preparing for something like this. And I don't really, what you're talking about to me is not creating problems for me mentally, personally. Obviously, I don't like it. I don't like what you're saying. It's like Jeremiah the prophet, when he was prophesying to the people about the Babylonian invasion, they didn't like it, and Hananiah came down and said, no, this isn't going to happen. And I think Jeremiah said something like, man, I'm with you. I wish it wasn't going to happen too, but it is. It still is, so. And, I don't think either one of us are speaking this into existence. I think we're just identifying with what we see. And everything you said, like I said, maybe at one time in my life, I would have just gone tilt, like I can't accept this. But at this point, I think, well, these things are feasible. I do have questions about China. I've read Sun Tzu's book, The Art of War. And in the book, The Art of War, it's basically a strategy book. I think they study it in U.S. War College, if my Air Force colonel friend who's passed away had told me the truth. And I think I've always kind of felt like the Chinese were more passive aggressive than aggressive aggressive. Like the Cold War thing for the Chinese really fits well with their narrative. But as far as actually getting on the ground with rifles and guns and shooting us, I've always kind of been of the persuasion that they'd rather buy us than kill us. But I mean, I could be naive, I could be or ignorant in some way. But I was just kind of curious what your thoughts might be on that idea with China. When I looked at their history, I don't see a lot of Chinese imperialism. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but the Japanese invaded China. The Japanese were very imperialistic, but the Chinese don't seem to be so much. And I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on the Chinese position. Now you've done some studying. What are they trying to get into Taiwan now or something?
Yeah, and I think there's been noted by some that there's been some soldiers crossing the border. Chinese
soldiers.
So, yeah, but
really?
I can't verify that. I just, this is just stuff that's out there. I just know that we understand where things would like to go. And let me just step back for a moment and acknowledge that there's a lot of people in the Christian community, people that you might term as kind of prophetic and stuff, that are calling for, good things and wonderful things. I always make room for that in my heart because everybody has a word to share of what God's showing them in the way they perceive or understand or where they're at. And I always try to make room for that, but I always try to balance it out with practical things. It's like we can say and believe a lot of things, but if you don't make preparations for some of them, you might find yourself falling off in a big hole. And you got to make preparations to prepare against what may be or lying ahead. At the same time, understanding there's spiritual principles that become involved. Now, I don't know of very few that called for this pandemic. Very few prophetic people called it before it happened. And I think there might be, one or two that I may have been aware of that may have been acknowledging something of that level. But the majority, weren't saying anything about that. And so is it that they overlooked things? Was God not talking to them about those things? I can't answer that on their behalf, but all I can say is the way that I process it. I believe God is here and he wants to establish his kingdom. And he wants to see many people brought into the kingdom of God through the Lord Jesus Christ. But there's also very practical things that you gotta mind and tend to. And that's what I'm doing is even though I don't like some of these things that I'm seeing starting to unfold and what may occur, I still make preparations for them. And if it doesn't happen, I'm fine. But what I do see is it seems like there's an intentional, I'm not trying to get away from your China question. I'll try to work that back in. But there's an intentional work to destroy our economy. And what we've seen with a pandemic, in some sense, there were people getting very sick and needed that help. But at the end of the day, the statistics are starting to creep out that shows it wasn't to the level that they were projecting it to be. But why did they do all that? And then why are they still holding and locking down cities right now when other places are opening up? And knowing that when you shut down a whole country, and they're doing this around the globe, I understand, but let's look at our country. When you lock down a whole country, everything stops. And there's some things that's going to be lost that will not be able to come back online, and that being a lot of businesses. And they're projecting somewhere around 40% of the businesses may not come back. And that's a lot of people. And that's a lot of income. And when the $600 a week runs out for a lot of people that they're getting, then things are going to get real testy for those people, because they're going to wake up and there's no more check coming in, and they don't have a job, no income coming in. And so the unemployment checks have run out. So you're going to see levels of this happen that we have not walked into as of yet. So our country is going through a level of the destruction of our economy. It's plunged us into a level of chaos that we see now manifesting in what we're seeing on the media today with the chaos and the rioting going on. That always and could get activated, or could be elevated to a level of it becomes a nationwide movement, which we're kind of seeing that because it's being birthed. We even had here in Cape Girardeau, there were peaceful protests, but protesters walking down Broadway down to the gate of the Mississippi. We got some floodgates down there, and so they did a very peaceful demonstration, which is okay. But what we're seeing is this: everybody's picking this up across the country, and so how's this all going to shake out? If it gets more violent and more shooting takes place, it gets elevated. Sure. Military moves in and all that. But what's going to happen down the road, I believe, is a collapse is pretty well set into stone. But I can't tell you when that's going to happen. I just know that we could be rather close to that. Built into that, and if the good people are able to carry this thing through, we'll have a currency reset. And if we've got the right ones in position, it will be a good transition, and the assets of people will be preserved in a sense through the reset or a change of currency. You can't throw away or get rid of 24, 25, 26 trillion dollars of debt without just wiping it all out with another reset. And I think that's where they're going. They'll probably spend as much as they can, create more money supply. But at some point, our economy cannot handle it. We're already at 96% loss of value of dollar. So our purchasing power is going to change now. $3.50 pound hamburger now is running $9, and steaks are running $18 a pound. So we are in a food hyperinflation now. And what happens in what we're going into, and they flood the system with all kinds of monies, which are creating out of thin air, inflation kicks in. And everything, there's going to be things that you can't get because we're in an economic collapse because of the pandemic. Supply lines have shut down, and the things coming from China have been basically turned off. And we're looking to other places like Taiwan. Ironically, things are being dealt with there between them and China. But we're seeing how our supply lines are going to be challenged all across the board. And so America is going to be throttled back tremendously. We haven't even hit the things that could unfold in the supply chain. I mean, we got a taste of it when everybody tried to go buy toilet paper. And so they went into the Walmart. You couldn't get any because they didn't have any. And for weeks there, they didn't have it. And everything else, from Kleenexes, everything else was gone off the shelf. So people got a little taste of that. And we're still getting taste of that. They're filtering in with, more toilet paper. But we're seeing other things that's being shorted also. And meat now is being in short supply in some places. You're limited by 1 or 2 packages of meat. So I guess in some sense, have a feeling we're being indoctrinated to shortages. But in another way, we just need to see what's on the horizon here. The supply chains have not come back on. And what takes to get a cow to market takes another year to get another cow. And so there are things that's going to be in short supply for another year. And so when I come back and realize, I think that there's been a lot of purpose behind the scene to bring a level of destruction to our economy, to bring us down to a third world status. I think it's been purpose to plunge us into chaos into this country and let that become a trigger point to elevate it even to riots and fighting. And then at some point when the shooting begins, there will be limited levels of civil war that will be introduced. Then it takes us to that scenario that I referenced earlier. And I think it's some of the UN's directive under what they, back in 1994 and 95 in Rwanda, the United Nations pulled out, and of course, UN peacekeepers left, and then there was an enormous massacre of people. So they
Houthi rebels, right?
Yeah, they evolved into these Kigali principles, and these are guidelines that the UN is to follow when certain amount of civilians' lives are in jeopardy or at stake, and given the right circumstances, even with a civil war in a country, to whatever level, then the UN will make its approach and come in, and according to what they say, is to help to bring safety and peace to the civilians. We don't want that, and we can see that may could very well happen. It's been planned for, and it's there ready to be implemented. But depends on how our country responds and what the president does, and how this fighting and stuff unfolds. But technically, in a real sense, we're already at a war with China on certain levels, with the pharmacy end of it getting shut down on the pharmacy products being sent in. They're going to stop that. We got, I guess, sleepy with the production end of it in our country. We let other countries pick that up. And now we need to come back to America. Now, let me say this. Let me pull upon those people that's prophesied great things. America has the ability to turn around and become a great nation, but they're going to have to follow God. If they don't put the principles of God and they lay that down, then we've got a lot of difficulty we're going to go through. But America can become very resourceful, very creative. It is. And America can be great again. It has the ability. It has that nature within them. And I think that God's ultimate desire is to see people, come to those places like that. But if people forsake his principles and his guidelines, and a nation loses sight of God and begins to elevate man in place of that, and government in place of that, then God will deal with that. And I'm not in the grace teaching in the sense that everything's going to be fine and dandy. We don't have to worry about that, and God's loves everybody. He's going to bless everybody, and everything's going to be okay, and everybody's going to heaven. I don't believe that. I believe that things will be dealt with accordingly, and we've got to stay on mark with what God is saying and what His guidelines have presented to us in His Word, if we're going to see the blessings of God come. So, in summary, in short term here, these cities are going to become death traps because there's no money to fix the places they're burning up. They don't have the resources. They were already in the midst of a economic collapse with their businesses being shut down. So there has been an economic collapse of capitalism. The shortages are already here, and that is only going to escalate as time goes on. And we're seeing the real question now, and you're seeing it every night. The issue, is there a rule of law in the cities where all this is going on, or is everybody backing up and just letting people do what they want? You can't afford to do that. And some people says, well, you just, let them just, work out their grievances and let them riot and loot just till they get it out of their system. I'm not on that page either. And if someone throws a brick through a window, they need to be arrested. And so there needs to be a rule of law established. Now, if we don't, we'll lose the country if they just let this thing go by. And so, given all that scenario, some of that's primarily focused on the United States, it makes America very, very vulnerable to whatever happens outside of America. And so, if we get this weakened state, then are there institutions that will take advantage of us, or will they gain an interest by our chaos and fighting that may be going on in parts of our country? Will they see the open door with the laws that have been signed, some of which was in the past administration, that allows UN incursion, we may be challenged with looking at America, one that we've never seen before. Now, it's not my desire to see that. I want to see awesome, great move of God. And I think in the midst of all this, we're going to see that. I genuinely think there's going to be a move of God that's going to take hold and touch the lives. And many people are going to be brought into the kingdom of God. Many people are going to be born again into the kingdom of God like we've never seen before. But typically when they reach levels of like what we're seeing going to come, they're usually in the midst of a lot of persecution and difficulty. And I would say that we're in the midst of persecution and difficulty that's being escalated every day. But we'll just have to trust in the Lord and let him show us what steps that we need to take. But realize the world we live in now. If you say everything's going to be good and dandy, then go to pay a visit, to some of the big cities tonight and see how, wonderful and dandy it is. These things you have to deal with. You have to contend with. If you don't, there are elements that have been embedded into those that takes it on to another level, to a level of a revolution. They would like for that to happen. And socialism is what is the thing in the background that's trying to take hold of America. It's in the younger generation, many of which, believe in the ideals of socialism with free college and everything's paid for. Well, you get a whole society that does not want to work. No one knows how to work and build anything anymore. And these are the things that we're going to have to change. And that's what you and I have upon us is a charge to challenge this generation to follow the principles of God and begin to be people that know how to work and know how to put your hands to the task instead of getting all the freebies that the socialist would like to have. America cannot go socialist. If it does, America's over.
Yeah, I was examining the parables and the parable of the talents, and I was looking at how each man received a sum of money. A talent's about 40 pounds of gold, and that's a lot of money. So one guy gets 5 talents, one guy gets 2, one guy gets 1, and the guy with the 5 talents puts that money to work, and he does something. It doesn't really say what he does, but he works with the resources he's been given, and he doubles that money. And then the next guy takes his 2 talents and he doubles it. Well, the third guy takes his talent and he's got issues. So he hides the money and returns it to the master and says, "Here's your money," like thinking, hey, you're going to be, this is going to be acceptable. So the master takes the talent from the guy that has 1 and gives it to the guy that now has 10. And he throws that worthless servant outside. He calls him a wicked, lazy servant. And I think, if the Christian church knew that God was not a socialist, it would help the Christian church to find their moral compass on this issue, because I've got colleagues and friends who don't know how to vote. They don't know who, I don't know where I should, or they align themselves with a party that leans more towards socialism. Now, let's back up a minute and realize that we've just experienced a lot of socialism in the United States under the leadership of our Republican Party. All these checks and all this stuff that's going out to the citizenry, that's all socialism. Now, I didn't return my check. Did you? I kept mine. But that's the problem. It was Alexander Tytler, the 17th century professor, that said when the citizenry realizes they can vote themselves money out of the public treasure, the republic's gone. Uh-huh. And I'm a little concerned that we're going that direction. I'm optimistic that, as you described, the good people, in power, that they could pull up the stick and we could salvage the republic. But I'm also very concerned that, unfortunately, I think it was Bill Maher who said that we don't stand a chance against Trump unless the economy collapses. Mm-hmm. Bill Maher is not one of my favorite people. Part of what I do like about Bill is he tells you what he thinks. He's not hindered by what he wants to say, but I'm not always in favor of what he thinks. But the fact that he feels like he can say it, I do celebrate the free speech side of that. But I don't know. I've been concerned for a while about things, and I kind of manage fear, anxiety, and all that. I don't have any anxiety. Maybe I'm not smart enough, to have any anxiety. I don't have any worry. I don't have any anxiety. And I really am trusting the Lord. And like, to me, what does that mean? I think for a lot of people, it means, you just sit in your chair and just wait, nothing's going to happen because you're trusting the Lord. It's kind of like Noah, God says to Noah, hey, I'm going to destroy the entire earth with a flood. And Noah says, oh, okay, well, I'm trusting you. I'm just going to sit down. Well, that's not what you do. When you get information or heavenly intelligence from the Lord, you got to build an ark. Even when God told Moses, hey, I'm going to fight this battle for you, if his hands came down, they started losing. So to me, trusting in the Lord means do what he tells you to do. And unfortunately, I think there are a lot of folks out there that don't have a clue. Christian people, they are so busy and so inundated with day-to-day activity that they don't really have any idea what the Spirit of the Lord is saying. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you come on, because I do trust what you have to say. I know you, I know you personally. And you talk about, you didn't really use this term, but as I heard you talk, I was thinking about prophetic credibility. Like if you get a guy that comes on a business network and he says, hey, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is getting ready to tank. And then 2 days later it tanks. Then you got to listen to that guy. You got to think, hey, that guy's got a little credibility, But if you're like a prophet to the nations and you're, you got all this revelatory gifting and you got all this going on and you don't say one single word about a global pandemic, it makes me question, the credibility. I mean, I'm not trying to be cruel or judgmental. And I know ministers have got it tough sometimes, and I'm not trying to pile on that deal, but I just kind of wonder, how, if you're that connected, you know what I mean? Like you have angelic visitations and you got all that going on. How do you not see that coming? You know what I mean? Maybe, you know what I mean? It just seems like, and I'm not trying to be overly critical, but I that's just how my mind works. It's hard for me not to think that way. And so like, if I don't know something, I usually say, I don't know. But if I think I know something, I'll say, well, I think this, but I'd love to be wrong about this. I would love to have this one wrong because I don't see good things coming on the horizon, but this is what I really think. I had I'm trying to think, I was wanting to share something with you about, I know what it was. I stood up in front of our church and I started seeing some, patterns. I think it's in Ecclesiastes. It says what has been will be. So if you know a little bit of history, you can sort of prognosticate and tell what's going to happen. And you combine that with the Spirit of the Lord saying, and John says he'll lead us into all truth, show us things to come. So I was starting to see President Trump as a Herbert Hoover. And I stood up in front of our church and I said, I think the economy could collapse on Trump's watch. And it kind of, I didn't get any amens, I didn't get hey, preach that, brother. I didn't get any kind of response like I can remember, but I felt like a weight, like the watchman on the wall. He has to sound the alarm. If he doesn't sound the alarm and people get hurt, he's responsible. But if the watchman on the wall sounds the alarm and people's, I don't have to listen to that guy. He's always blowing that trumpet, and they get hurt, then that's on them for not listening. So I had to wash my hands. I had to clean my own hands and say what I thought the Spirit of the Lord was saying. And it had to do with Donald Trump being a Herbert Hoover and how the powers that be, if Trump was truly a political outsider. Now I thought maybe he's not. Maybe he's just created this image, but if he is truly a political outsider, the only way to get him out is to crush the economy on his watch. And I figured it'd be through monetary policy. I didn't see racism and all that coming down the pike, although I did get a word about that, I thought too, which I could talk about later. But anyway, I began to think that Trump would be connected with with the U.S. economic collapse and blamed. And just like when Herbert Hoover was president of the United States, he was a Republican. And after he came out of office, there was not another Republican voted into the U.S. presidency for 20 years. The American people were like, no, we don't want a Republican. No, look what they do. Look how bad they are. They wreck the economy. And my take on Herbert Hoover was, the money supply was restricted. I don't think Hoover, he instituted tariffs. I mean, there's a lot of similarities between President Trump and Herbert Hoover. And I really got concerned at that point that we'd see an economic collapse on Trump's watch, but it wouldn't be because of Trump. But the citizenry won't know. The citizenry will just think, oh, dumb Republicans, let's riot. We gotta get socialism. That's what we need. But they're just being hoodwinked, in my opinion.
Yeah. I was reading a book. In fact, I ordered it, Fruits of Graft, A Great Depression Then and Now by Wayne Jett, which is a real good read. He's a elder man, an attorney, and his book is very, very detailed with our past history and where things are headed as far as a depression. But I have listened to him talk like on YouTube, and you can reference and pull him up, Wayne Jett, Jett. You can pull him up and listen to him, and he talks about there is a possibility. This is before the pandemic. This is before the impeachment. This is before any of that all began unfolding. He says there's a good chance that the reset would happen before the election, which is yet to happen.
You're talking about a global currency reset, right? That's what you're talking about?
Yeah, but the conversation was in the context of, America and the United States, but it would take, with what the economy around the world is going through and what we understand, yes, it's probably a global currency reset of sorts to put, people more on an equitable basis. But he says this could happen before the election. Now, I didn't know how that plays out now with the pandemic, impeachment and pandemic and the riots. And then they're already prepping people for another outbreak of a virus in the fall and trying to get people geared up for that. And the president's trying to ungear all that by saying we're not shutting things down if there is another outbreak again, because he realizes where things are. You shut it down, the American economy is over. You're going to have to pick things up and start building with what we've got. Now, the riots and all this I think is being planned out, instigated, and they want it to go much larger and cover a good portion of the country, is designed to keep things where they are and just, trash America is basically what's unfolding. And that has to stop. If that doesn't stop, they don't get a handle on it, then we're still at that place of point of no return. But again, there's a lot of resolve in the American people, and a lot of things can change. But we have to focus on what needs to happen now, what we see coming. Now, for me personally, just in practical terms, I didn't have to run and go get toilet paper, when the threat came. I didn't have to run. I wasn't bent out of shape over any of that because I had already, made preparations. What can happen here in a currency faltering system, which looks like where we're at, is the credit system will begin to lock up. I don't know how easy it is to get credit now. I don't know how easy it is to go get a mortgage because it kind of differs in different places. I know my bank I deal with, they still haven't opened up yet, and everything's being done over the phone and online. And the business I'm doing with some other things, I'm having to do it at distance and not in person. So their ability to step out and venture out with venture capital and all that is not there right now, because they're having to cover a lot of businesses that cannot make their payments. And when I was able to go in there, I said, this thing's not going to last a month. This thing's going to last a lot longer than a month. And they agreed. So now the banks are deferring the mortgage payments, and in some loans they're taking the interest and putting it on at the end of the loan period, and so people are not paying their mortgages right now, especially the businesses that are struggling to bring things back online. But the bank has to eat that for right now. And so it's getting very testy for their stability right now. And that's very practical. That's very real. And it could be a credit crunch, or could I say the credit will dry up. And if the credit dries up as things goes on and things don't change, then your credit card won't work. And a lot of people are living off credit cards. Well, then what the ATMs will shut down, and so cash will not be flowing out of the banks for periods. That's when we get real close to a currency reset. And they tried to stave off a bank run when this thing began unfolding several months back, and tried to create confidence in people that, hey, everything's fine, everything's good. And you saw a lot of commercials of banking institutions coming online making those statements. Some of the brokers came online and saying everything's fine, it's all about being consistent and stability and all this. And so they're trying to calm a lot of people down so they don't run and pull their monies out of the institutions, whether it's a bank or whether it's a broker or whatever. But if things get more testy and more difficult and things start to tighten, you will see people start running on the banks and pulling their monies out. Just like they ran and, you couldn't buy any certain kinds of foods in stores because people panic, and you went online, you tried to buy long-term storage food, you couldn't get it 10 weeks out, if that. And some of them, I won't mention names, but said that we are not taking any new orders at this time because the run was so massive on them. People began to do what they saw they needed to do. It's the same thing now. We're kind of like in the eye of the storm economically, and if they do not kind of bring things to clarity and stability, then you're going to start seeing some of the bond markets, happening, imploding. You're going to start seeing runs on banks, credit tightening, credit cards being shut off. They already started lowering the credit limits on credit cards for people. Thank God I'm not in that position. But they are already implementing what they see as a great liability. Anywhere that they've got a liability, they're trying to shut those avenues off. I'm talking about the lending institutions, with that being credit cards and borrowing money and so forth. That's being greatly limited, at this point. So what happens in the days ahead? You can kind of paint the picture. If they don't get this thing under control, and this thing elevates to another level, and martial law in certain locations is implemented, supply chains are going to be disrupted and shut down. And what we've seen in shortages, we're going to see big shortages down the road that will elevate into where it becomes very racial. There will be civil war aspects coming into play. People will start using that word more and more on the news. And it just weakens America all around when we see that scenario. Now, again, let me come back and say there's a lot of good people out there, that have words of encouragement, and things are going to be fine and great. And let me tell you, I embrace what you say. I stand with you, but I just got to make some practical decisions and just be prepared just in case, because I paint one picture, which is what I've done today. And I realize that I have to make some necessary changes, even what I'm doing, to prepare for tomorrow. It's just like with the COVID-19. Now they got trackers they're starting to employ and put out there to track people that have that, and their associations, visit them in their homes and stuff. That's not good down the road, because it speaks more than just tracking a virus. With the phones, people are tracking. They're using that on the riots now, and tracking people in their associations with whomever, and trying to locate these people that are causing problems. So there is a lot of tracking wanting to come in line. The social credit system's going to come into play in a great way. People will have on their phones be able to report other people for what they would see as a violation. And I think it just kind of escalates and continues on. And in a crisis, they always want to take advantage of a crisis to implement new things for us.
Yeah, you're referring to the Emmanuel doctrine. I think, Rahm Emanuel, he basically said you never want to let a good catastrophe go to waste. If you want to implement some kind of plan that you couldn't normally implement because the citizenry won't go for it, you hit them with a bunch of fear and they'll scream for it. Yeah. Please take away our guns. Please take away our guns, or please take away our freedoms. Please, monitor our every move. Please, please. And so fear is a very powerful motivator that's used. I think too about people like, you don't need to do all that. You just need to trust God, brother. Where's your faith? Well, to me, my faith's in what's God saying right now. And if God's saying you need to prepare, then you better prepare. And people, that's right. Go ahead.
Yeah. We're in a year of preparation. We have probably less than a year to prepare with the things that we need to address. And get ready for the next level, where God's going to take us through.
Yeah. So like most homeowners that I know have this thing called homeowners insurance, and it usually costs $1,000 to $2,000 a year to carry, depending on the size of your home or the value of your home. And people spend that kind of money every year after year, to protect their home. And not one single person I know is hoping, man, I sure hope I get to use that homeowner's insurance policy this year, right? But they still keep preparing, and even Christian people, and so these ideas, what you're talking about, to me, is very prudent. It's preparation. It's just being wise. One thing that I've considered, maybe the most important thing, is a network of like-minded individuals. One person will say, hey, I know how to live off the land. I can hunt and I can skin deer and I can run a trout line, and I can survive in a tent in the wilderness with my dog, and we're going to be just fine. We don't need anything. Well, I don't know how well that's going to work if everybody's got the same idea. I mean, it's not that stellar of an idea. So that means a lot of people are going to have the same idea. I mean, I can remember when I was a child watching a cartoon called Eccl and Jekyll. I don't know if our viewers are familiar with Eccl and Jekyll, but they were two little blackbirds. And those two little blackbirds jumped out of a pie at the beginning of the show. And the reason they jumped out of a pie is because when that cartoon was made, a lot of people were eating blackbird pie. That was a very common thing to eat blackbirds. I've never eaten a blackbird. I don't know. Have you?
No, not me.
So, I mean, the reason I think people were eating blackbirds is because they were coming through the Depression. Farmers couldn't make any money selling their crops, so they just plowed them into the soil. And at the same time, you got American citizens who are literally starving to death, which is it's odd, right? You got people starving to death and you're destroying food at the same time. So I think to prepare is really wise, and ask the Lord, what do I do? What do I need to do to get ready? I felt like the Lord spoke to me. I guess it's been 2 or 3 years now. He told me to get ready, body, soul, and spirit. You got to get your mind right. You got to be sharp mentally. You got to be in prayer. You need to be connected to me. You need to be abiding in me every day. And then part of that too had to do with my physical health. He basically told me, look, you've let yourself go, man. You need to tighten that up. You need to take care of yourself physically. And so I began to do those kinds of things, not really knowing why, not knowing. I began to kind of guess, I began to kind of question, well, maybe I'm going to need to be able to walk a long way. Maybe I'm going to need to be able to run a ways, or, all these kinds of things. I didn't know. I was going to share with you another thing. I got a word to go to a place in Arkansas called Jacksonport. And so I didn't go right away, but about a year later, I went to Jacksonport, and I was praying because of this word, and I didn't hear a thing from the Lord. I just didn't hear anything. I was on one of the men of our church asked me to go fishing. A couple guys and we were out there, and all of a sudden, one of these guys says, "Hey, look down." He said, "Look at that. You can see these swirling patterns in the river." He said, "This is where the White River and the Black River meet." And I immediately felt like the Lord spoke to me. He said, "Hey, I want you to mix the rivers. I want you to mix the White River and the Black River." So I began to reach out to ministers, other pastors who were of color. And I said, hey, man, let's get our churches together. Let's mix it up. And these guys were like, all right, yeah. So I've got pastor friends who are of color, and I'll take our church over there to their church, and they'll preach, and I'll preach, and we switch out in each other's churches. And, when this happened, this has been years now since we've been doing this. I asked the Lord, why? And I thought, well, there's things that they have that we could use. There's things we have they could use. It's good to network together. It's good to cooperate and all that. And then I began to think about racial tension. And I thought, no way. I thought, no way. I just didn't see that on the horizon. I just didn't see it coming. But I did feel like the Lord said, do it. So I did it. And I did it in a lot of, I don't want to say ignorance, but I didn't know why. I just did it because I thought, hey, it's the right thing to do because the Lord's telling me to do it. So I'd stand up and testify in these meetings with these guys and all their people, all our people, all mixed together. And I'd say, hey, I'm not here because I think this is a good idea. I'm here because God told me to be here. And I'm part of this fellowship because that's what I think the Lord wants me to do. And so that's what we do, And like I had no idea that I just didn't think. I mean, maybe I'm just like a ignorant white guy, you know what I mean? But I just didn't think that this would happen. I mean, racial tension in America in 2020, it just seemed like what? I mean, it just seemed like a strange thing to me, but here we are, and like you implied earlier, there could be forces that be at high levels instigating that and pushing that narrative and trying to, create that kind of tension, united we stand, divided we fall kind of thing. And, some of that Saul Alinsky kind of rules for radicals kind of, these ideas that could be, perpetrated in the background, driving this activity where I don't mean to be condescending, but there may be a lot of people that are involved in these activities that are pawns and they don't even realize that they're being manipulated to do some of the things they're doing. So I'm like you. I'm just preparing. I bailed out of the stock market years ago, probably prematurely, really. But I didn't trust it. I didn't trust paper assets. I moved into more solid assets, more real estate investments, and things like that. I thought I could trust. I could get my hands on it. Even if things collapsed, I could still have the deed to that piece of property or whatever. Uh-huh. So anyway, when all this was going down, the stock market was falling and everyone was freaking out. I'm not trying to sound arrogant, but I was cool as a cucumber because I didn't have any skin in that game. Uh-huh. I mean, I do have skin in the game because I live here. I'm a U.S. citizen and I've got friends, and I've got people that I love who are being annihilated in these markets and different things. But as far as personally, because of what I thought the Lord was saying, the chickens didn't really come home to roost personally. And so also, playing that forward, here I live in a city with like 10,400, 10,500 people. Our entire county has about 35,000 in it. And, we're scheduled to do a food distribution this Saturday at our church at Jubilee. And it's been going so good. We worked out a deal with the farm to bring in double. So we're bringing in 2 18-wheeler trucks full of produce. We're just going to give away about 54,000 pounds on a Saturday. And we had some traffic issues the last time we did it. And a couple of our local officers came in. They were very friendly and just kind of asking us, hey, how can we help and all that. And anyway, so I'd already contacted law enforcement to let them know what we were doing because I was anticipating a pretty good crowd. Anyway, so I reached out to law enforcement again, and they responded to me and said, hey, I don't know if we can, I don't know if we'll be able to help you Saturday because there might be some protests, in Batesville. And I thought, okay, these guys are they're being proactive and being prepared and all that. But, I live in a town where, if there are any protests in our town, I'll really be kind of surprised, and I know where you live in Cape Girardeau was about 35, 40,000, something like that. Mm-hmm. I don't know, it's just hard to know what's going to happen, but
it's
be prepared.
Yeah, you've just got to prepare, and it just makes sense. It's common sense. It's being very practical. You're not bailing on your faith when you make preparations, which some people get hung up on that.
I know they do. You're right about that.
Yeah, they trust the Lord and they say, well, the Lord will take care of me. But I believe there's an element of the Lord that the responsibility is on us to take care of what we can take care of. And when you've done all that you can take care of, then that's when you see the miracles and God steps in and help. So I'm very much on the page that we need to do what we can do. And I try to encourage people that, because I want to see them succeed, I want to see them to be helped in times of need, to make preparations. And so common sense things to do is the name of the game. And so I stress to people, put your stuff into hard assets, precious metals, food, whatever you need that will be stable and consistent with what may come, which it's getting to look more and more like it will come.
Right.
You're talking about how the stock market went up and came down, and it when this thing hit, it crashed down and then came back up. But many people that are in that arena studying that says it's following the same pattern as the Great Depression. So there's always the big kick in, when it drops down, then it kicks way back up. But then they're showing that they're laying the graphs on top of each one, and they're showing how that it's following the same steps as the Great Depression. So if that's true, and it's by reputable people that are acknowledging that, then we need to make preparations. And I don't think our preparations will hurt us at all if it doesn't happen, but it looks like
Right.
it very well could do that. So that's my word of encouragement to people. I don't try to get weirded out over anything, and just take it as it comes and make the decisions and have everything planned out and prepared it the best that you can, and then trust the Lord for the rest of it. But the days of America are going to be a lot different. America is not returning to the days that it was, and what we have known of America will never be the same prior to all this that has happened in the last 3 or 4 months. And so you and I need to look down the road, and how does that affect us and what we do, even with our churches. What do we do with our churches? Because churches have had to change what they're doing. They've had to adapt and to go online, even though I'm a little bit uncomfortable with relying on that as a means of what you do with the gospel, because I think that we have to get one-on-one with people. It's kind of ironic that the pandemic, stifled the one-on-one communications with people, and that's what Christianity does. But we'll have to weave our way through that, and we will adapt, and we will come out victorious on the other end, and we will do what God has put upon us, that assignment. We'll fulfill that, and give all glory to the Lord, for what has been achieved. But in the midst of all that, then just use common sense. Use common sense and make preparations here and there. And common sense to me speaks like this. I'm not going to be driving down some of the big cities now in some of the places because it will not turn out good. That's just, everybody knows that. That's practical. Very common sense there. And it's taking that kind of thinking and applying it to other things in our life. Don't go out there and do what everybody else is doing. Just sit back and listen to what the Lord's telling you to do, and follow suit with that. So prepare in the best way that you can.
Yeah, and two, I think we should connect. Like-minded people, neighborhood watch groups, stuff like that. I don't think there's any harm in that kind of stuff. Because you just never know. It's good to know your neighbors. It's good to know people who you can trust, people you can talk to, because things could get bad, and you'd want to have that network. Those group of trusted people.
Yeah, I live in a good neighborhood, but I'm just a mile off of the interstate, and a lot of things can happen, and people can move back and forth. I mean, we're 2 hours south of St. Louis. We're 2.5 hours north of Memphis, and so we're kind of right in the middle. And both areas are having problems now. And will that branch out? If the rule of law breaks down, yes, it will branch out. And so we have to make preparations. And right now, I'm believing that won't happen, but we just want to make preparations, to do that. And I live in a neighborhood where there's quite a few law enforcement individuals, so it wouldn't be hard for us to facilitate what needs to be done to protect our neighborhood. But you may be living somewhere that you need to consider that. I noticed last night on the media there were people that had heard that the writer says, now we're going to come to the suburbs, and we're coming to your suburb, to your block, to your city, part of the city, and people, the neighborhood, were out defending their homes so that wouldn't happen down their streets. So yes, there are people that are having to do that right now. And so you just got to begin to think out those scenarios and be prepared.
Well, let's end on that.
Okay.
Sure appreciate you being with me today. And I know our viewers and listeners on 88.1 FM are going to really like this. If it's all right with you, I'll leave this on Facebook for a while, let people watch it. The videos that I've been doing, have been getting between 300 and 1,500 views on Facebook. And then over at YouTube, I don't know, hundreds of views on YouTube too. Some of the videos, not all of them, but some of them do. And I would suspect that this video would be popular. I really appreciate your insight, what you've had to share. And we'll also concurrently play this Thursday morning on 88.1 FM locally here to our local listening audience, and also around the globe on kbapfm.org. So we'll get some ideas out there.
Sounds good.
But I sure appreciate you for being with us, and thanks for listening to 88.1 FM, KBAP.
Right, we'll see ya.
See ya.